Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Pat Furlong from PPMD, and we're here to talk about the Catabasis study. I thank you all for joining us. I know yesterday many of you or all of you have heard the results of the Catabasis edasalonexent study, in the study that has been terminated. Today we have Joanne Donovan on the line, and she's going to talk about the study, its top-line results, and what the next steps look like. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joanne Donovan. Joanne?
Thank you, Pat. I'm here at Catabasis, and I just want to let you know that my colleague, Maria Mancini from Clinical Operations, is here as well, Andrea Matthews, Advocacy, Communications, and Jill Mills, our CEO, is here. So at the end, we'll be able to answer as many questions as you have. First of all, I can't express how deeply disappointed we are and to be bringing this incredible community this bad news. You deserve more than more bad news. I appreciate. And what we have tried to do here is to understand whether edasalonexent is beneficial.
Joanne, I'm sorry to interrupt, but could you get closer to your phone, or it sounds a little gravelly?
Okay. Is that better? Pat, is that better?
Yes, that's better.
That's good. So what we have tried to understand is what the effect of edasalonexent in 4 to 7-year-old boys in this study. We received the results a few days ago, and just to let you know, we shared the results with the community at 5 o'clock yesterday, sending out the community newsletter as we have in the past at the same time as we shared the press release. So it's been a very short time, and we wanted to get on here with PPMD to be able to share more information with you, as I know that you have many questions. We did let the investigators and site personnel know ahead of time that we would be having a webinar, and we had a meeting with them last night and another meeting this morning. So they have as much information as possible to be able to share with the families in the study. I'm sorry that we can't reach out to the many families who are likely on this call. I wish we could reach out to you directly. And unfortunately, because we are a public company, we need to make the results public all at the same time, unfortunately, and we regret that. We know you've put so much into the study. I know this is a common problem for many trials, all too many trials in this area. So I know if Pat, you want to comment on that process.
Sure, Joanne. I think that it's always a struggle when we have discouraging results such as this, how people find out, and one would really like the PI to be able to reach out to each individual family. But because of public companies' responsibility to release the results, because they are required to do so, it usually will go to they release the news after 5 o'clock on the day before they're going to talk to everyone else. So it goes basically to the markets, to the PIs, and then to the families. And because this was an international study, it's even harder because of the different time frames. So that's why people find out in different ways at different times. And it is so hard to receive these results regardless of where they come from. And the preference would be for the physician and the clinical site that you've been participating in. But it isn't always the case, and I think everyone has tried to think about how to get around that or try to do this in the most efficient way possible. But at the end of the day, some people do find out because of a press release. And so we all can't imagine how that must land. But I will say to you that Thanks to Catabasis, PPMD will provide support to the families in the study. You're welcome to call us. We'll provide support and guidance and advice, and please feel free to do that. So thanks to Catabasis. And I think the other thing to mention is, because of this, Catabasis came right to us and said, let's have a webinar as quickly as possible. And that's why Joanne's here today, because knowing that people receive the information in different ways, and perhaps even different information, it's really important for them to hold this webinar so that they can answer questions and explain what they learned through the study. So thank you, Joanne, for doing this and doing it so rapidly. So that we appreciate your thoughtfulness about this and about how difficult this news is for all of us. So I'll let you start in on what you've learned.
Okay. Thank you, Pam. This is for the community, and of course, edasalonexent is an investigational agent. So to summarize what you saw yesterday, the trial did not meet the primary endpoint, which was the change from the baseline value at the beginning of the study in the North Star Ambulatory Assessment after 1 year of treatment with edasalonexent compared to placebo. We also had secondary endpoints that were timed function tests, such as the time to stand, the 10-meter walk-run, and four-stair climb, and they also did not show statistically significant improvements. We looked at assessments of muscle enzymes and heart rate, and it did not show a statistically significant treatment effect. What we did see was that edasalonexent was observed to be generally safe and well tolerated in the trial, consistent with what we have seen previously in the safety profile. And based on this, after speaking with several of the principal investigators and experts and regulatory consultants, we made the very difficult decision to stop edasalonexent development activities. We also decided that the GalaxyDMD open label extension trial needed to be stopped as well. And that was because when we went to regulators and we went to the ethics committees, we asked them basically, or the sites asked them to approve the trial based on that we would delay steroid use for 1 year during the trial, that we would have information at the end of that year on the effects of edasalonexent, and that without a positive finding, we didn't feel that it was justified to keep patients on Galaxy, on edasalonexent, especially since there was another option to them available, which would be steroids. So we'll come back and I'll be happy to answer your questions later on stopping and what that means. So the design of the study was 12-month study looking at edasalonexent, 100 milligrams per kilogram versus placebo. There were 2 boys that were randomized to edasalonexent for every boy who was randomized to placebo. And after the 1-year primary endpoint, boys had the option of enrolling in the open label extension GalaxyDMD. We enrolled boys with any mutation, age 4 to 7 up to their 8th birthday, who had been off steroids for at least 6 months. And in fact, almost all of the boys had never been on steroids. As I mentioned, 2/3 of the boys received a drug. Initially, there were visits every 3 months with safety measures. And the endpoints were consistent with regulatory guidance. In addition to those primary and secondary endpoints, we looked at measures of growth, cardiac, and bone measures, and I'll have more to say about them. The trial we enrolled very quickly with 151 patients screened. The last part of the study, when patients were coming in for their 1-year visits, was largely conducted during the pandemic. There were about 7% of boys that were discontinued during the study, and I think that that's amazing for the dedication of the families and the investigational sites, that no one was discontinued because of COVID, that the families, that the physicians figured out with Catabasis how to make this work in a very unusual situation. Most of the boys completed, then went on to the open label extension, so are currently in the Galaxy study. We looked at North Star because it is a validated scale that was developed for physical performance in boys with DMD, that is reproducible, it's widely accepted in clinical trials, and it has been recommended as a clinical trial endpoint both by FDA and EMA in this age group. So it's very importantly, it's patient-centric because we have information on what parents consider to be clinically meaningful in terms of losing the ability to do particular functions. It's composed of these 17 measures from most to least difficult, and they're things that happen in everyday life. So in the rare cases where we were not able to have patients come into clinic, we were able to capture the North Star ambulatory assessment measures using trained observers remotely with video with the help of the families. We looked at the secondary endpoints and, as I mentioned, additional assessments, including patient, or in this case, parent-reported outcomes, the PODCI measure. Now, what we saw, and let me walk you through this graph, this shows the change from baseline. The average at the beginning is 0, and then whether it went up or down, and at the different time points, 13, 26, 39, and 52 weeks. We saw that at the end of 52 weeks, while there was a slight positive difference for edasalonexent, the difference was 0.3 points, which was not statistically significant and not in the realm of really being clinically meaningful. You see the numbers of patients that were assessed at the bottom here, and for the most part, these were all done in clinic, 85% of them. And at the week 39 visit, we had a lot of patients that were not, or some patients that were not able to come into clinic, but managed to continue to get drugs shipped to them and assessed remotely for safety. As far as the secondary endpoints go, we saw that for the time to stand, the speed of these, now up faster is up, 10-meter walk run, and 4-stair climb. In all three cases, the boys on edasalonexent on average were faster than the boys on placebo, but the differences were not statistically significant. When you translate this into time difference, these on all of them took about 5 seconds at baseline. And at the end of the study, the time to complete the time function test was, in the case of time to stand from supine, it was 1.4 seconds faster for edasalonexent than for the boys in the placebo group. It was 0.3 seconds faster for the boys in the 10-meter walk run, and 1 second faster for the boys for the 4-stair climb. Now, we looked at this also for other subgroups, and that's an important thing in the trial to make sure to look to see the differences in how different groups of boys react or respond to a medicine. In the younger boys, that is the boys that were 4 and 5 at the beginning of the trial, we did see a stronger signal. We saw that the times were the difference between the placebo and the edasalonexent group were greater. And that is intriguing. We spoke about it with experts, with people like Craig McDonald, with Richard Finkel, and we looked at that and tried to understand, was that something that we could go forward with to regulators? And unfortunately, the signal, they believe that there was a signal there, as we did, but it wasn't strong enough to go forward. And we want to make sure that we're very clear with the community that while things moved in the right direction, they didn't move enough. And we don't want to give false hope to people that we would be able to go forward and register this drug. One of the aspects that we also look at is parent-reported outcomes, because as you well know, we're looking at things in clinic. That's what the FDA wants to see, but what happens outside of clinic is certainly far more important to you. And the parent-reported outcome that we used, the PODC, there are different scales. This is about 88 questions about how boys are functioning in daily life. Can they pick up a half a gallon of milk? Can they keep up with their peers? And these are each individually rated by the parent at the beginning and at the end of the study. We saw that for the scale that is most important clinically, the basic mobility and transfer scale, there was a difference of 2.7 seconds between a decrease seen with edasalonexent versus a larger decrease seen with placebo. So again, this was not statistically significant in these boys. We also looked at measures of muscle enzymes. The muscle enzymes decreased by between 2,000 and 3,000 per CK, but there was no significant difference between edasalonexent and placebo. We looked at the EKG measured at the beginning, 6 months and 12 months, and we saw a small decrease for edasalonexent, about 2 beats per minute versus 1 in placebo, so not a significant difference. We do have additional ambulatory heart rate monitoring parameters, and those data are not yet available, and we'll be sharing those as they become available. We also looked at bone health during the study, and we presented some of that last month at World Muscle. But we have seen already that at the beginning of the study, boys had decreased bone density compared to unaffected boys. And in fact, 3 boys had vertebral fractures even at the very beginning before they were on any drug or on any steroid. We've been working with Dr. Leanne Ward, who gave a PPMD webinar recently, and those data at 52 weeks are not yet available, but they are very important data in terms of understanding the natural history in this age group and in the group and how they progress over a year. So we'll have those later in the year. As far as safety, we continue to see that edasalonexent was safe and well tolerated, as we had before. The vast majority of the adverse events were mild. There were no treatment-related serious adverse events. Serious adverse events is something that we look at if a patient is hospitalized or a medically serious event. There was one event classified that way on edasalonexent, a patient who developed infectious gastroenteritis, norovirus diagnosed, and one patient on placebo who had a bronchiolitis, a pulmonary infection. We list here the adverse events, the side effects that were seen in more than 5% of patients, and as well those that were seen in more than 5% in edasalonexent than placebo. So I haven't shown you the ones like cough that were more common in placebo than in edasalonexent, because presumably that's not related to drugs. About 62% had diarrhea versus 28% placebo. 33% had vomiting versus 26%. So we know that this is something, many of these side effects are things that are common in boys of this age over a 1-year period. So these are the things that we saw. These adverse events were reviewed by the DSMB on a regular basis, as well as the efficacy data. And so they were always looking at the data in an unblinded fashion, so they could see whether patients were on edasalonexent versus placebo and giving us guidance of anything needed to change in the study. We looked at growth over the 1-year study, and we saw that, as we had previously, boys on edasalonexent grew similarly to unaffected boys and gained about 1.8 kilos and 6 centimeters. We did see that they had a decrease in their body mass index, the weight to height ratio basically, on edasalonexent because they gained a little bit less weight than they gained in height compared to placebo. So they approached the 50th percentile, which is essentially the target. Those are the key results of the study. There's certainly much more that we are going to be looking at and trying to understand more, but these tell the story in terms of whether or not the trial is successful in terms of being able to go to the FDA and EMA. So what are next steps? As I said, we are deeply regretful that we are stopping the development of edasalonexent and are not able to bring something forward to the community. The boys and their families and caregivers that are currently participating in the Galaxy trial, their primary communication should be with the principal investigator and the site for more information. And the sites, when we made the information public, we had let the investigators know that there was a webinar for them at 6 o'clock last night. Most of the sites were actually on that webinar with very short notice to get more information, and many of the rest of them were on a call this morning at 8 o'clock to get more information so that they have as much as possible to share with you. We have started to roll out to give them the treatment assignments, so families will know whether or not their son was on placebo or active. We're getting that out to them very quickly in the next couple days and giving them access to their individual data. We have a lot of work to do still in analyzing the additional data, including the bone and cardiac, and we are committed to sharing the data with the Duchenne community. We are planning to submit these data for presentation at conferences and to publish the results, and there should be several publications coming out of this. And really to the end that we hope that these data and all of the efforts by the families, by the investigators, the sites, our team, will really benefit ongoing and future research and provide additional data to the Duchenne community. So I want to thank you all for your attention, for all of your efforts, because so many of you, those of course who participated in the study, were made enormous sacrifices, certainly to be in a study. We know how much that takes out of people, how much effort it is. And many patient groups have guided us and supported us, as well as all of the efforts from the clinical side investigators. So this has been an enormous effort by many to understand, and we do have a clear answer for this. I know that we've had questions come in. I think before we start to take questions. I was going to turn it over to Maria to comment on and stopping the drug and the instructions that the sites are getting and what they are conveying to patients.
Yeah, thank you, Joanne. In addition to Maria, when you talk about that, there were some questions about basically, do we need a washout period of time before starting a steroid regimen? And I'd like to sort of add to that, just as a question, in your EAP, once the participant had completed the study, and then we're in the extended access program, did any of them start a steroid regimen and along with, or were they able to start a steroid regimen along with the ongoing study drug? And has that happened? Did you have any data on it? So if you'll talk about that, it would be terrific.
Yeah. The question of can you dose both of them together is important, and we actually recently have preliminary data from a drug interaction study in adults, and you do it in volunteers and in healthy adults, basically, to look to see if edasalonexent affects the levels of steroids, in particular deflazacort. And we didn't see that there was a meaningful clinical effect there. So we did not get to the point where we allowed patients to start on steroids in the study, but we don't see that there is a need for, there's no safety reason for a washout of edasalonexent. And so patients should be able to start on steroids without any delay because of being on edasalonexent. And of course, that's up to them and their physician of what to do there. But from the viewpoint of what would edasalonexent do, there isn't any need for delay there.
Great, thank you.
Okay, this is Maria Mancini, and I just want to echo Joanne's words to this community. Thank you for everything, for those that participated. We know that was an incredible effort, particularly through a pandemic, and we know a lot of you went back and forth to the site, many with siblings, and, we know that was extremely challenging, and I just want to say thank you again, and we really appreciate all the effort, and it is so unfortunate that we're here today with this data. But I do want to share that we are working very quickly. The team at Catabasis just heard the news last night, most of the ops team, but we are working really quickly to distribute information to the sites. And so we're nearly halfway through sending out the treatment assignment groups this morning. And so what that means is we're sending a list to each of the sites, and that will tell the PI whether your son was on edasalonexent or placebo. And we have instructed the site to contact families as today. We would have liked that today. We recognize we are operating in different time zones, but did express urgency to reach out to families with this information. And second, behind the treatment assignments, we are also asking sites to talk with families and understand if families want to come back into the clinic for a final visit and walk through answering any questions, reviewing, your data with the PI and the study staff. And so we hope that also gets underway shortly, recognizing that, we are in a virtual world right now and in some areas more than others. And so we are leaving a lot of that logistical, sort of how things get done to the site. So that's a discussion that we encourage families to have with the site and as to how that information is relayed and exchanged. We know that there's study drug with these families at home, and so we're going to provide further instruction the next couple of days on what are the options for families to send those bottles back, trying to make things as convenient and easy as possible. and more logistics to the site. And so we're working quickly to get this sort of checklist off to our sites, but really encourage them to be reaching out if families have not already reached out to their site.
Thank you, Maria. That's very helpful. So the families in the study will be they'll be contacted by the site for further instructions. And offering the final visit, I think, is a terrific idea. You know, I think that in the community, first of all, this group of families is very young, probably many of them almost nearly a few weeks or months after the diagnosis of their son. So this is the first experience with a clinical trial, so supporting them and making sure that they have people's arms around them and guiding them through this process is going to be really, really important, in addition to the struggle of the hope that we had for this trial and the wish that it would have, in fact, met the primary outcomes. I guess just in discussing that, and this is for you and Joanne as I think about questions here, one of the questions that I had, is on slide 9 when you talked about the dosing and the length of the study. But one of the questions that I would have is in Duchenne, sometimes in a year these children don't change very much. We see in the 4 to 7 year old age group that they improve a little bit, but they do bump up and then they sort of plateau. So I just want, and I know it's theoretical now and it's just a discussion. So I'd love from you the thoughts on a longer study or a higher dose. Would you think through those things? Would you recommend that? Would you, if you created or developed another study, would you think through those issues in terms of edasalonexent didn't have many side effects, so you could go up in dose without toxicity, it seems. And it's not always more is better, but I just wondered your thoughts.
That is certainly something that we have been thinking about in terms of the dose. We had looked at a higher dose by mouth in the previous MoveDMD study and saw that there wasn't more absorption of the drug. So in order for a higher dose to work, it needs to be absorbed adequately. So with this oral capsule, we're not able to really get effectively a lot more drug on board. So I don't think that is an option for moving forward. It is something, though, that we are going to spend some time thinking about alternative. That, of course, puts us back to an earlier stage in development. To your question on the duration, clearly we have all been agonizing over this in terms of clinical trial development. The advantage of going longer is being able to see a signal. At the same time, the disadvantage is asking families to participate in a study of even longer duration. And in this case, where patients were delaying the initiation of steroids, we didn't feel like that it was an option to go beyond the 1 year point in terms of delaying in terms of the duration of the study. So we'll certainly think about that more, but that was our thinking at the time, and I don't see a practical way around that.
No, I agree that it's really a struggle to think about a study that lasts longer than 12 months or 52 weeks. I think that these trials certainly have an emotional and mental and certainly physical impact on these families and these boys participating. But at the same time, you don't want to see a drug put on the shelf because if you waited a little longer, the signal would have been bigger. I guess that's always our hope, and I'm sure you're thinking about that as well. I think the amazing news is you conducted this study through COVID and through this pandemic, and we're able to continue getting the data. So kudos to you, and I think we have an awful lot to learn from you as you experience the pandemic and still getting these families to the clinic. I'd love to learn more about, you talked about and mentioned the observer for the North Star. Was that done in the home? Was that done at an off-site? Where was that observer of how did you manage that off-site North Star?
Yeah. We worked with Michelle Eagle and her group at Adam. They actually are the people who developed the North Star 15 years ago. And they put together a video, a manual, basically. In trials, it's very important to have standard operating procedures for how things are done. And so that was done with a trained clinical evaluator remotely on the video with the parent on the video. They did a setup call ahead to make sure that all the equipment was there. The Royal We, aka Maria, made sure that they had equipment shipped out to them if that was needed. And then, only then, did they do the video assessment remotely and recorded it so it could be reviewed later as well and timed. Because it turns out that timing video is important because, as we all now know about Zoom, you can get time compression, you can get delays there. So it's important to do it on the recorded one as such. And those are all done in a compliant way so that they are in terms of privacy. So that was something that needed to get figured out very quickly, and kudos to the clinical ops team that managed to do that.
Yeah, Joanne, that's pretty amazing, and certainly a lesson learned because for clinical trials. And I wonder, I think many of the parents who traveled, if they traveled a considerable distance, whether that was by automobile, train, or plane, when we had all those options, right? I wonder, because sometimes the travel on a child and their family is so significant. I wonder if over time, if we continue to do this, that we'll see differences between North Star in a home environment versus in a clinic environment with all the nutrition and travel and all of the impact of participation in a remote site. So I think, I appreciate you're doing that, and certainly Adam's done amazing work on this issue as well, because as we live in this current environment, I think we're going to need to be a little more flexible about how we do things and how we manage these outcome measures. So thank you for that. I know that some of the parents are worried, and I think you and I talked about this earlier, that, if your child was doing well and suddenly stops this drug and then starts doing not very well or starts falling a bit in terms of declining, do you have are they going to do at this follow-up visit whenever this occurs? Are they going to do the North Star? Are they going to do any outcome measures, or is this going to be a very simple visit of stopping and giving directions about returning the pills and so on?
Yeah. So the plan is that this is a safety visit to to understand if there's been any additional adverse events, to give instructions and follow-up instructions to certainly let the site know if there is a significant change, or which would be considered to be like a side effect, an adverse event. I think that what you're speaking to is that some parents see that their child is doing better, and some parents don't see that. And it's incredibly hard to sort out whether that is because of the drug or because of chance. I mean, we have been working with other companies looking at placebo data or natural history data, and we know there's a huge variation in children and what happens over a year that is only partially explained by things like age and how they were doing when they started that year. So it's very hard to say whether or not a child is doing better because of the drug. That's actually why we need to do clinical placebo-controlled studies. That's why the FDA wants us to do that. At the same time, I would say that to parents that are concerned about stopping, to talk to your investigator, talk to them about it, and they can reach us and understand better what the situation is.
Great. Thank you so much for that. A couple other questions, if you don't mind. In the earlier study, you did some MRI of the muscle. Were any of those MRIs like the imaging DMD approach for the imaging the quads and the big muscles, did you include any of the MRIs in this study, or was that just singularly in the earlier study?
We used MRI to understand in a smaller group of boys the changes that we were seeing in muscle structure, and the hope was to be able to translate that into a larger effect. We did not include MRI in this study with sites across 8 countries. I know that Imaging DMD is doing a great deal of work to create a broader network. It is hard to, and we found that was one of the greater burdens of the phase 2 study was the MRI, in terms of patients having to come and to the site, to the limited number of sites. So we decided not to include that in the phase 3 study. Part of our thinking was that the FDA would be looking at the functional measures. So if we saw an effect on MRI, but we didn't see an effect that was significant on functional measures, then the FDA would still go with the functional measures. So it would be burden without potentially benefit for the trial for the families.
Right. Thank you. Well, and maybe if I could get back to when we're on the subject of MRI, in the cardiac studies that you did included in this study, was it an echo or was it a cardiac MRI that you've been looking at and will be soon analyzing?
We did not look at echo. We spoke with some of the cardiac experts, and at this age, there aren't changes in echo. What we do know is that an elevated heart rate is the first sign in these boys. And so we did an ambulatory heart rate monitor to look at not just heart rate, but there are some other EKG variables that are abnormal in Duchenne. Of course, there's dystrophin in the heart and even in the conduction system. So we will look at that with experts, and we'll also, I think that's a potential, the contribution to the natural history and understanding this disease and the early cardiac effects, and we'll be doing that. But we don't have echo data in these boys or MRI data. They are a little bit young for that. And you mentioned also, I do want to say on MRI, I think that it's an incredibly valuable technique to understand what's happening in the muscle and what the response is to various drugs. So I think highly of MRI, and that we should be continuing to include it in earlier studies to understand the effects of drugs better. So I think that it's a wonderful group to have worked with Imaging DMD. And I know I supported them for many years.
Yeah, and they're trying to qualify fat fraction, so that, there will be one day when we have a biomarker of fat fraction. But I appreciate you adding that to the earlier study and certainly recognize its burden. I also appreciate thinking about monitoring these kids on the cardiac side of things, because we're trying to learn as much as we can about the heart. Certainly on MRI, we see strain on these kids, and we really can't interpret it. So if we are able to treat the heart, we really need outcome measures. So all this data contributes to our understanding. A couple more questions. I know we're getting late on time, but I think probably this community is quite surprised to know on vertebral fractures, even without the steroids in some of these little ones, because we know that on diagnosis, the DEXA scan is -1 or 2 standard deviations below. So we know that their bone metabolism is impaired based on the muscle disease early on. And I'm just surprised that they also could have vertebral fractures. We certainly see them when they take steroids, but to see them prior to any intervention is, I think, eye-opening for all of us, and we should be very aware of that with these little ones, and be thinking about spine x-rays as part of the diagnostic workup so that we understand where we're starting from, because sometimes when we see them, we really can't track when they started. So I think that's terrific, and I think this data will contribute significantly. I am also hopeful that the 4DMD study, which has been completed for more than a year, will soon release their findings. I think this will add to our understanding of this population, and we're all very anxious to see it. And so we're going to try to do our very best to see if we can get that released. Also, what you mentioned diarrhea and vomiting as in terms of the adverse events. Did that just a simple question of as they took the edasalonexent, did that clear up, or was that pretty continuous for the kids that experienced diarrhea and or vomiting? Did they have that throughout the dosing, or once they tolerized, they were less?
Most of the episodes of diarrhea were actually in the first month of dosing. We looked at that over time. And in general, the investigators found that by adding some more fiber to the diet, perhaps making a little bit more fruits and vegetables, it did address it. It was not a long-term problem. None of the boys, I won't say it was not an issue in that none of the boys went down in dose because of it or discontinued because of the diarrhea. The vomiting, the average length of time was less than a day. It appeared to be at random times through the year, and there was about 6% more in the treatment group than there was in the placebo group. So a high number in the placebo group because we've kind of all met 4-year-old, 7-year-old boys, and that happens now and then. So I think some of that is baseline kind of what happens, and with a small contribution. So.
Yeah, and I think because we know very little about the smooth muscle impact of Duchenne, I think you're exactly right. Some of these little kids have some stomach issues along the way, either elimination or some queasiness in their digestion. Depending on what they eat, they can get a little bit of upset in the GI. So I appreciate that. And Joanne, you'll be the individual results are really critical. I know these families will be so grateful to have their individual responses. I think there isn't a person alive who goes into a clinical trial, I think, without making sort of guesses in their head about whether there's active compound or whether it's placebo, and trying to second guess themselves all along the way. So I appreciate getting the individual data back, and I know they will as well. And I'm assuming you'll provide all of the data to the CTAP consortium as well as the DRISC consortium, so that we have this growing and expanding contemporary natural history and can develop those disease progression models.
Yeah, that's our intention, to share the placebo arm so that can be compared to others. Absolutely. So.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, I also wanted to make folks aware that we are trying to understand the experience of trial terminations. Ryan Fisher from the PPMD is leading this effort, and so if those of you who are online who've been involved in the study, we would really ask that you take the survey, because this is the way we learn, by really trying to understand what the impact is and how we can do better, because we're all trying to serve this community as well as possible. So, Joanne, I can't thank you enough. This is really disappointing news. I know that 2020 has delivered some really difficult challenges to us, and I think this feels like we really want to get past 2020 and start a new year with a lot different endings. But I can't thank you and your team enough. You've been so incredibly responsive to this community, so deeply thoughtful about our patients and our families and all of us in terms of every foundation about including us in what you do and how you do it. I can't thank you enough for all you do. I wish you Godspeed. I wish you good analysis. I thank you for contributing all that you will be doing from the analysis and the learning to this trial. That's critical for us to have this knowledge to go forward. And I hope you'll stay in our community, because we really treasure you and we wish you all the best. So thank you to all of you at Catabasis, and thanks to all the families and all the people who've joined us online. This really matters, and participating in these studies, as difficult as they are, as mentally challenging and physically challenging as they are, and then receiving disappointing news, it's hard. But we thank you and we're grateful, and thank you to everyone online. It's really a wonderful community. So please, let's hang together and keep going forward. Thank you, Joanne.
Thank you for your kind words, and thank you to this incredible community that it has been a privilege to be a part of. And as you say, we're not going anywhere. We're gonna be around and sharing more in coming times.
Yeah, we won't let you leave. Thank you so very much. And with that, we'll close the webinar. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you again.